So for those of you who may not be aware of what Reviewr is, we're an online platform used by grant makers to power the entire kind of grant life cycle from start to finish. So everything from the intake of grant applications to all the operational tools to the review selection, recipient selection of grantees to ongoing grant relationships and impact reports and deliverables that you might be collecting from grantees in the future. Been doing this since 2010 when we built the company. I think what makes us rather unique and how we can kind of have these conversations is that we're not just your typical, software company or platform out there that just said, "Hey, here's some tools, go use it." We actually built Reviewr from our own firsthand experience. So we served on volunteer review committees for a wide variety of funding initiatives. This goes way back in time when these programs are done through paper, if you can believe it. And if I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody who still does things through paper, but there was a time as a volunteer committee member where we'd have hundreds and hundreds of binders physically mailed to our doorstep. We then kind of lived that online transformation, which was a combination of built-in web forms and emails and spreadsheets and downloading of documents, which quite frankly, I think is where a lot of organizations currently still live. For us, though, a couple of problematic things started to apply, one of which was inefficiencies, right? As a volunteer, fatigue became a real thing. We spent way more time than we had. And then as a byproduct of that, a couple other, I guess, unfortunate things started to happen. So number one is, at least in our small, close-knit community, we as committee members knew who the applicants were, right? We saw names, we saw demographic information, we saw highly confidential stuff. And it turned into, instead of a review committee sitting down and making selections on the most qualified candidates, it turned more into a popularity contest. So compliance and bias became a big ordeal. And we're actually going to address some of those here today, both through AI and tools. The other challenge we started to run into was lost information. So with all the downloading and recompiling and the exporting, it was inevitable that either somebody might get misplaced or you might miss a line or row within a spreadsheet. And there was use cases where, entire funding cycles were complete. And then months later, we found out from applicants that they said they quote unquote applied and we never looked at it. So long story short, we built Reviewr one very selfishly as a volunteer committee to make our own lives significantly more efficient and easier. But equally, if not more important, is how do we elevate the experience for everybody else involved? And that goes from applicants to board members to donors to sponsors. So with all that said, we for the last 6 to 7 months have been working very, very closely with our current 1,000 plus clients who are doing grants and scholarships to kind of define, like, what does an AI policy and initiative look like for them moving forward. Again, a lot of them came to us saying, hey, obviously we use AI in so many different facets of our business. How can we start to leverage it in our operations? And so we've kind of compiled this into a very short-term Q1 of 2026 goal of 5 key areas where we are going to be deploying AI tools. But on top of that, I think that in 6 months from now, 8 months from now, not only will this list look very different, there's going to be a lot more on top of it. So with all that said, let's jump into kind of the 5 key areas I want to address here today. I am going to leave a quick note here as well in the chat, one of which is my personal calendar link. And then the other is how many of you are concerned about the utilization of AI by applicants? So the reason why I bring that up is right now we found that a lot of our clients have gone through their application forms and they started to look at like the budgets and the proposals. And they're starting to identify very clearly and obviously that a large percent of a grant application is actually being generated with the tools like ChatGPT. To the extent where, like, when clients will read application forms and they have descriptions of projects and proposals and expectations, the prompts that the applicant used in ChatGPT are actually being copy and pasted back over. That's how obvious it is. That's an extreme example. These tools have gotten so good and so robust. There's also tools that can DAI AI. But the common request coming to us at Reviewr was, how do you guys potentially help us identify the utilization of AI by our applicants? And it's kind of a polarizing conversation because, again, AI is here. It's a tool, it's a resource, it's an asset for us to use. But there is a dramatic difference between somebody taking your grant applications, your criteria, what you're looking for in an applicant, copying and paste it into Chat GPT, uploading some of their documents and then basically having it write it for them, and then coming back to your application forms and then literally copying and pasting it. That's like obviously what we want to avoid. What I think is going to probably happen more so is, they use AI to help build a framework of a grant proposal and grant writing, and then they start to massage it from there to make it hyper unique and custom based off of their own human instincts. So right now, doing some early studies and some early data analysis, Right now, on average, roughly within Reviewr, 42% of grant applications are leveraging AI to assist with their content creation. And so now the next step to this is how do we identify how much of that 42% is copy and paste versus just using AI tools to be better grammar, better writing, get their ideas across. So what we're doing here at Reviewr, I'm going to kind of introduce this, and there's kind of two pieces to this. It's not just AI content detection, but it's also going to be plagiarism detection as well. And that is going to be what we call Sidekick. And this is going to be a tool, if you think through it from the perspective of a credit score, is there's a lot of platforms and softwares out there who are industry leaders in doing AI detection. Everything from content to photos to videos, you name it. So instead of recreating the wheel, Reviewr in itself is integrating with multiple of these sources. And again, treating it like a credit score, we take the best that they all have to offer and we centralize it into one spot. And really the goal here, again, is for you guys to be able to identify across your applicant pool, like how much AI is being used by the applicants, figure out like what is an redeemable threshold, and then allow you guys then to use that to build policies and make decisions off of it. So by no means are we making decisions for you. We certainly do have some clients that say, hey, if we identify that you're using AI to write your applications, you will be disqualified. I think that's an extreme example. That's not going to be terribly common, but at least you have an idea of what's going on. So the way that this works is within Reviewr, you're going to be able to define like what questions you want to scan and analyze against. Now, again, I'm not concerned around applicants using AI to write their name and their organization. I care more about like their budgets and their proposals and like their how they're going to measure success and KPIs and things of that nature. So once you define that in real time, these tools are going to scan the application forms. And then on a grantee or an applicant by applicant basis, it's going to give you a score. And it's a percentage score of 1 to 100%. 100% indicates that their entire application was verbatim created by AI. And then 1%, obviously, or 0% was, they've written on their own by hand. From there, we can start to analyze on a question by question basis, like how much were those questions used, and then allow you guys to actually physically see what was flagged. So in your dashboarding, you're actually gonna be able to see again that list of AI detection as well as plagiarism detection. What I expect to happen at this point is you guys can then start to run some averages off of this. And so you could say, hey, of our 100 applicants that we received, the average amount is 30%. So if you start to see applications coming in at 60, 70, 80%, maybe you want to make some decisions off of them. If they're, sub 30, sub 40%, they're okay. They kind of meet the industry standard threshold. Now, from there, once you open an applicant's profile, you're going to be able to scan on a question by question basis. And that's where you get like the personalized scores. So it's going to show me, hey, this question specifically was 100% written by AI. Let's now click into that. And then using these integration partners, it's going to break down the content and why it was identified the way it was. And these are really cool tools because it's going to show you like how much of it was written purely by AI, how much of it was written by human, how much of it was written by AI, and then kind of like updated by a human in itself. So again, this is just our way of trying to give you guys more data to have visibility on what's going on. Now, going back to plagiarized content, which is actually becoming a growing concern, basically ripping off and duplicating other proposals that are out there, it's a bit easier because it'll actually identify like the actual content itself and then the source material where that came from. So again, coming into today, I think a lot of you guys are looking at this more from a perspective of operations and efficiency. This is a little bit different, but it is a growing concern among some of our clients. Therefore, we're kind of initiating this conversation. The next thing I want to look at does shift the focus back to operations. So the premise behind this is summaries, or what I call review briefs. And this is going to be largely dependent upon the complexity of your grant proposals or applications that you're collecting, as well as volume, how many applicants you receive. One of the growing concerns that we get from our clients is volunteer fatigue. Your review team can only look at so many submissions, and to give you guys an idea, that number is roughly 40. We'll come back to that. Some of our data suggests that if a committee member is reading more than 40 applications a piece, their energy starts to decline pretty dramatically. And the first person they score versus the 41st person they score are actually on different scales, even using scorecards. So the question then comes into play, how do we combat that? Can we get additional people to help us do review? Well, potentially, but now we have got more volunteers. We can't really ask them to read more. So how do we take the content that you're collecting and make it a bit more bite-sizable or but more manageable for them, so they still review the same number of people, but their time on task drops by upwards of 50 to 70%. And to address that, we're looking at summaries or review briefs. And these are powerful tools. I don't think I want to replace application forms, but it's a way for you guys to internally identify, hey, what is it that we're looking for in a grantee? What type of data are we looking for? What type of experience? What type of projects? And then massaged properly, these AI summaries can analyze complex data sets. So long, lengthy application forms, as well as file uploads, bring it all together and then summarize it in a way that your team can identify the key elements most relevant to what you're looking for in a grantee. And then from there, diving deeper into the full proposals or full applications. So I know for certain we have many clients who are actually going to replace their submission forms with summaries, and that in itself is what they're going to be using to do review and selection. With that said, I think the bulk of our organizations that we work with are going to use this either to give their review team a high level synopsis of the candidate to give them more insights as they go through the review, or they're going to use it as like a preliminary review process in itself. So again, using very simple math, let's just say you have the funding to give out 20 grants in a calendar year, but you got 100 submissions. How do you kind of narrow that number down from 100 to say 50? And then those 50 are the ones that you spend the bulk of your time getting really deep into the application forms and the file uploads and doing your due diligence. So in this case, you guys could leverage summaries, right, to review all 100 of them, and then very quickly and easily make kind of two piles, those that you want to focus your energy on versus those that may not align with your mission and your vision. So what does that look like? These are some kind of simple examples. But within Reviewr, obviously, in this case, you have your full-on application. So we have an application from the Harvest Hope Community Alliance. We have some of our initial eligibility verification that's going on. And then we get deeper into the full complex application form. So organizational information, project details, dates, deadlines, budgets, amounts being requested. Then we get into like your measurable outcomes. So your KPIs of how they're going to measure impact of their program, organizational history. I mean, this list can go on and on and on. And then on top of that, we've got a fair number of supporting documents. We've got multiple letters of recommendation. We've got tax documentations. We've got budget uploads. We've got, audit reports, whatever it might be. So time on task, if I am a committee member, I have to read through this entire thing, A, remember what I read, B, compare it against other grantees, and then I have to start to analyze potentially some of these file uploads. So opposed to going that route, if your team has very clear expectations of what they're looking for in a grantee, they can simply flip the switch and view the summary format. Now, summaries, again, are highly configurable because you can actually have like a comprehensive overview of a candidate, and then you can start to do sub-summaries as well. So you could summarize their project, you could summarize their budget, you can summarize their community impact. And again, you can start to interject those elements to your scorecard as well. So if I'm part of the review committee, one of those questions might be like on a scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 15, how will this proposal impact our community? Or on a scale from 1 to 15, how aligned is their budget with the actual execution of the campaign? So instead of having this full-on application, we now have the organizational overview. We have a high-level summary of their project. We're also summarizing their eligibility. We're summarizing their budget, etc. So again, I'm very curious also in chat if any of you guys are currently doing things like this, just because I do feel like it's going to shorten the time on task pretty dramatically. The next thing that I want to look at here is going to be, I think, one of the more powerful elements for you guys, which is going to be document verification. So let's just kind of play out this scenario with me. With nearly every single grant application, you're collecting supporting documents from financials to tax documentation to 501c3 verification, all these different things. And for many of our clients, they're collecting that data within the submission form. So for example, like they're going to ask for your 501c3 information, they're going to ask for your budgets, but at some point in time, they will be asking for documentation to be used for verification of those metrics. Why does that happen? Well, A, we want to confirm that the data being provided to us actually is accurate, and then B, they need the formal proof of it. So let's just again say you had 100 submissions, and for each one of them, you had to read the budgets, you had to verify the 501c verification. They then go to these file uploads and then confirm if it matches or not. Even if every single one of those 100 matched, what's going to happen? You just spent roughly 15 minutes a piece just doing verification in itself. Now, if you caught one person or two people where the data doesn't align, then that was well worth your time, but you still had to spend it. So if we're talking about, literally 15 minutes per submission, we're looking at 24 hours of processing time. So how do we combat that here at Reviewr? What you're able to do is use AI to audit the file uploads and actually pull the data out of files and then compare it against the application form. So in this particular example, we're actually tracking verification on 8 different fields. We're tracking their EINs, their organization name, their grant requested amount, their budgets, you name it. And then within the form, so for example, under the grant amount, they're saying that they're requesting $75,000. However, in their file upload, they're saying that they're requesting 85,000. So there's a discrepancy. So instead of you having to line by line read through all that, it's going to actually catch it for you in real time. Now, going to things like your tax documentation, we need their tax ID number. They said it was, X number here. We verified it within the file upload, and as you can see, it matches there on its own. So there's another piece to this puzzle, which is going to be long-term saving your applicants a considerable amount of time. So instead of asking them to enter all this information, if they're already uploading the file uploads themselves, why not just pull that into the form and preload it for them? So the idea is like instead of asking for like their project dates or their 501c3 verification, they just upload files. The system will analyze the documents and then pre-fill their forms. So it saves the applicants themselves a significant amount of time, but also confirms accuracy as well. So kind of moving on. The next thing I want to look at is data redaction. So it's becoming a growing and common thing for organizations to try to redact any type of personal identifying information from applications to remove any potential bias from the review committee. So at the end of the day, when a grant committee member sits down to look at an application, if there's any content being shared with them that could negatively impact their perception of the applicant, it in theory should be hidden. So in Reviewr, things like their organization name, location, their tax ID numbers, all of that can be automatically hidden because we know what it is. Where this becomes significantly more challenging is when this documentation lives in long form content or within file uploads. So what many organizations have to do is if they're going to commit to data redaction, they have to fully commit to it, which means that every stone must go unturned. So they're reading through all the submissions, they're reading through the file uploads, and they're manually trying to track down in long form content, is there any PII? Using AI, once we know what's considered PII, so in this example, we've got Maria Rodriguez from the Sunrise Community Foundation, we can then analyze long form content and file uploads. And if we catch anything in there that matches that, the system can then automatically redact it for you. Now, to be very clear, I think if we are going to commit to doing data redaction, we have to go all in. So I do believe it does require human oversight to still analyze the information to make sure it didn't miss something. But instead of having to analyze everything, you're only trying to catch small portions of it because AI did the rest for you. For those of you that are not doing any of this data redaction currently, it is something that you may consider doing in the future just because it is a growing concern and trend about fairness within these types of programs. So I got 2 more things I want to look at here today. The last one that is going to show up here is going to be AI in the review and selection process. So there's very polarizing conversations around there. We actually have a lot of our clients that are looking at using AI to literally do the review of all applications and make funding decisions for them. That is a polarizing conversation. There's a lot of ethics involved in that. I personally do not believe that removing the human element is a good idea yet, although I think in 1 year from now, that certainly may be a conversation that gets picked back up again. With that said, there are certainly things that we can do to try to normalize the results and counteract potential bias and fatigue from the review committee. So one thing I want to look at here today, just for the sake of time, is what I call judging tendencies. Now, there's a lot of elements that go into setting up a review and selection process that also influence this. So for example, using randomization tools where not every committee member looks at every grant application. You can do things like saying, hey, I want every submission to be reviewed 5 times equally and randomly. And these all certainly do help quite a bit. But one thing I want to look at here is personal judging tendencies. So let's just make up two names. Say there's Kyle and Steve. These are two people who serve on the review committee. Kyle, on average, on a scale from 1 to 100, gives scores of about a 70. Steve, however, gives scores of a 90 constantly. So what happens to the applicant that was paired up with me, but not Steve? They're just inherently going to be penalized because I score about 20 points lower on average than Steve does. So using these types of tools, we can actually start to identify the individual judging trends and tendencies by your committee members. And if we start to catch some of these discrepancies, the system can actually normalize it for you. So for example, if I, as Kyle, give out scores of 70 left and right, and I scored somebody a 70, it's now a 1, which means they were scored average. If Steve, again, scores 90s and gives out a 90, he also scored that same applicant as a 1. Even though his scorecard says it was 20 points higher than mine, the two scores are actually identical because it's our own personal average. And then from there, we can take these personal averages and compare it to one another. So what does that kind of look like? Reviewr in itself has a very, very powerful judge configuration tool, we'll call it. It's a way for you guys to categorize your applications. It actually shows you in real time your committee member to applicant ratio to confirm that they're not going to be fatigued or overwhelmed. It also gives you multiple different ways to do assignments. So if I go back here, just for example, while I'm here, it'll actually show you guys 4 different assignment models. So every committee member reviews every submission, doing randomization, which could be saying, hey, I want each grantee to be reviewed 3 times, or you could do ranges. You could say, I want every submission to be scored between 3 times, but I want my team to never look at more than 20. You can do manual pairings where you actually pair up individual grantees with committee members, or you can do a concept called judge queuing. So this in itself is a very powerful tool. What I want to show you though is the results. So in a very traditional model, these grant applications come in, a team sits down, they go through judging, they do go through scoring. And then what ends up happening is either total scores are analyzed or they take an average. But again, the problem with both totals and averages is if you've got one committee member who scores way higher or lower than the rest, that kind of goes out the window. So we at Reviewr have a new tool called Review IQ, which is that personal tendency report. So if I click into Daniel here, you can kind of see that Daniel was scored by 3 individual people, Lisa, Maria, and Thomas. And it says right here that, Lisa scored this individual a 70, but he or she on average scores a 76. So they scored roughly 15% below their own personal average. So now that we know that, we take those new averages and we score them together. So the results look kind of bizarre. In this layout here, Jessica Brown's proposal is actually our highest rated submission because he or she scored 13% higher than the collective average, whereas Daniel obviously was the lowest rated applicant who scored almost 20% or 15% lower than the collective average. So these are really powerful insights to ensure that your team doesn't have any biases going in. We're taking into consideration personal tendencies, and we're leveraging all the different data that we have to ensure that the most qualified grantees or candidates are the ones that are getting selected. I want to throw one more kind of bonus tool out there for you guys. And I know there are some chats that I'm going to come back to here in a second, but I'm going to pull up a link for you guys, and I'm also going to drop it into the chat here. So let me go ahead and drop this in the chat. This is not Reviewr, but this is, however, a free tool available to philanthropic organizations and to nonprofits. So Grant Guardian is an AI tool from the Patrick McGovern Foundation. And again, they are providing this, I believe, free of use if you are a philanthropy organization. And what it basically does is it uses publicly available data plus AI to analyze grantees and do a risk assessment on them. So for those of you who are making your selections very strongly off of financial viability of a grantee, this is a really cool tool because it'll verify documentation for you. So it looks at things like tax form 990s, balance sheets, income statements, and it does some of the verification for you, but then it analyzes that data that basically says, hey, if you fund this organization, how at risk are we? So I know that wasn't part of the discussion, but I also want to throw that kind of bonus tool out there for you guys as well. So with all that said, I'm going to start to go through some of the Q&A here. I think a lot of this is from a grant writing perspective, but I'm going to read through this. I'll answer questions. I'll stay on for as long as you guys want today. If you have any questions around these AI tools, if you got questions around, my own personal thoughts around where AI is going, if you want to contribute with how you're using these tools, I'd love to hear it. But yeah, again, I'll hang out for as long as you guys want. Please do toss as many questions you guys have in there. Yeah, so a really good question came in, right? Around why is it okay potentially for committee members to analyze summaries, but it's not okay for the applicants to use AI to write it for them? And I am actually somewhat in the same boat as you. So I personally am a huge advocate of AI, and I can see a world where you actually, at least within Reviewr, integrate AI tools on the applicant's perspective to help assist with their writing. But the difference between that is, and again, I don't think we're saying that there's anything wrong with applicants using AI. The question comes into play is how much AI is okay for them to use. And again, there's actual examples that we have of applicants who will copy and paste full on essays right out of chat gpt, and when they did that they actually copy and pasted the actual prompt itself. So like that's an extreme example. That applicant in theory put in very, very little time or energy into the application form, and you can argue that it's wasting the review team's time to an extent. Now, again, do I think it's okay for them to use AI to write the best version of their essays or their applications as possible? Yes, 100%. On the summary side of things, again, it does potentially take a somewhat lazy approach, but the downsides are significantly higher because once you have a review committee member that gets volunteer fatigue, they're not able to give the time and energy to the applicant that they deserve. So unless we can significantly increase our committee pool of helpers to help analyze and read these applications, then there has to be that trade-off of what they're looking at versus like the effort that they're going to be able to put in. You can also make the argument that humans are flawed and they miss a lot of information, and so with a properly created summary, we are able to hopefully identify like the really key elements within their application form, remove all of the fluff. That way, the review team is focused solely on that most impactful elements that you as a team are looking for in a grantee. Another question came in around how we might use AI generated feedback for grant applicants before they submit. So I do like that. This goes more so on the end of like doing full on AI review. So there could be in theory a world where when an application applies, and you actually see this happening in jobs right now all the time, right? People are applying for job positions, AI is analyzing their resume and they're actually comparing it to the other applicant pool, and they're telling them how qualified or strong of a fit they are for a particular job position. So in theory, you could do something like that where the grant application is submitted. Upon submission, the system in theory could look up all the qualifications and the requirements that a group is looking for and compare it to other grant applicants, and then offer some feedback on, hey, your budgets might be off a little bit and things like that. Right now, that's not something that we've considered building, but I absolutely do love that. Again, it puts the applicants in a better position for success. And yeah, and again, to the question that came in around like the utilization of AI by applicants, it's completely subjective, right? I personally am very okay with applicants using AI to build their strongest application possible. That still is being written by them, not written for them. But again, there are organizations out there, and I can tell you this for certainty, that they're writing in their application forms, we have tools that can identify the use of AI. If you use AI, you will be disqualified. Do I agree with that? Absolutely not, but that is the thing. So it's very much up to the discretion. I think the goal here on Reviewr's end is to help at least bring awareness to like, is this a problem or not? And if so, what do you want to do with it? Helps you guys create policies with real tangible data of what's happening within your organization, opposed to like these blanket subjective statements. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the question that came in. I think I'm reading in the sense like on the city council side, the city council decision makers potentially may be biased and they have favored applicants. Yeah, I think anytime you have a review committee who knows who the applicants are and has relationships with them, that there's always going to be bias. And the goal at Reviewr is hopefully to give you guys tools to eliminate that pairing process. So maybe like conflict of interest tracking, but you can't fully combat that. And so, outside of you using external evaluators who don't know the applicants, what data can be redacted. So hopefully that doesn't become the case. But going back to a page kind of like this one, where I show you the results, it's not necessarily just to normalize it. It also would stick out like a sore thumb. So like in this case, like normalization occurs when people are plus and minus, 10 to 15% of their own averages. Like, what if Lisa on average scores a 76, but this one came in as a 95 or 100, or vice versa? What if it came in as a 25? Now the red flags start to go off. That's like, okay, like what does Lisa know about that applicant that caused that concern? At least now you can start to dig deeper into it. Great question came in around providing feedback from the grant process to applicants. So at its core, Reviewr does have a very robust feedback mechanism. Again, this is highly subjective and it's up to the organization themselves if they want to share back feedback. We do promote it, but again, it's up to them. So we do at Reviewr have the capability for full transparency where as a grantee, if you're not selected, the system, you could come back in and it would show you each individual scorecard that was filled out about you. So you can physically see why you were scored the way that you did. That's the extreme example. I think what happens ideally more commonly is those scores are summarized or aggregated or there are open-ended questions within the form for the grantee's eyes only, and those get shared back. So instead of saying, hey, here's all the scorecards that were filled out, here's a short paragraph on like why you may not have been selected. I think that's incredibly valuable for personal growth and development. And I think most organizations in this space do not want to see you fail. If you're not a good fit for them, that's one thing. But if they can give you feedback that helps you secure funding elsewhere, I don't think anybody has any qualms with that. So yes, Reviewr has these full loop feedback mechanisms, but it's fully up to the discretion of our clients or the grant making institutions to decide to use that or not. Great questions. What other questions can I answer for anybody today? And again, it can be not AI related. It can be more so, grant making in general. It could be about the platform, or we can kind of keep going down that AI rabbit hole because it certainly is a deep hole that we can go through. Question came in on the Review IQ. No, so that is a current tool that we can turn on by demand. So if it's a feature you want to leverage, let us know. We can certainly enable it. Some of these interfaces are kind of still a work in progress, but we do have this via reporting, which is pretty cool. So again, it'll show you individual tendencies by judge and actually show you like the math of how it normalizes the results. Yeah, so the judge assignment options. I recognize the name. So what you're probably looking at is, hey, this looks a little bit different, which it does. Reviewr is right now in a very exciting place. We've got some really cool, exciting things that are coming out. So there's a lot of elements and steps that in theory could go into configuration of review processes, from assigning submissions to judges to setting dates and deadlines, making the score or the applicants available to the judges. So we've got some pretty cool setup wizards that we're about to launch, as well as a kind of an overhaul to the UI. With that said, all of these elements do currently live in Reviewr as features. So to answer your question directly around the Reviewr assignment options, there are many ways that you can do this. We have tried to create 4 different assignment models, and they try to encompass every imaginable judging process there is. So for first and foremost, a very common workflow is every committee member reviews every submission. So if you have, 50 submissions and you've got 25, committee members, all 25 of them review all 50. And that's a pretty core standard process. Now, the downside of that, though, is depending on the size of your committees, as well as how many submissions you receive, if I go back a page, your applicant to committee member ratio starts to get out of whack, right? It's just that you're starting to induce fatigue. So to counteract that, you can override this and look at some of the other options. So one option we have is manual pairing. So we actually specifically have some clients, and not very many anymore, who will say, okay, let's jump over to our judge listing. And they'll say, I want Sarah to be reviewing these 3 submissions. I want Professor Williams to look at these 2 submissions, right? And you can completely manually pair people up. The 2 most common ways that reviewers use, however, is your random balance. And again, this can be used 2 different ways. We have some clients that say, hey, let's just do an equal distribution. So I want every submission to be scored 5 times, right? And then the system will equally and randomly take your submissions and then assign it back out. And that's also where you can kind of see the approximations down here. So if you go back to what I said earlier on and we say, okay, well, 40 is the limit, you can just kind of keep bumping this number up. or down, I should say, until they're under 40. So in that case, each one is scored 3 times. And then when the review team logs in, each one of them will have 3 submissions assigned to them, or 39 submissions assigned to them equally and randomly. You can also go off of ranges, and you could say, well, that sounds great, but my team should never look at more than 15 to 20 submissions. So I personally really like this model, but the downside to this model is, again, not every committee member reviews every submission, which is where that judging tendency comes into play. So we recently launched a new feature called Judge Queuing, which is a combination of that, but it's actually pretty powerful. So one of the downsides is that your team will say, "Hey, I can review 15 people." But what happens the night of the deadline, and one of your committee members can't fulfill their obligations, right? Now you're left scrambling, trying to reassign your applications to your team to get them to get scored. So Judge Q eliminates that. And what happens here is you set a threshold of how many times you want a submission to be scored. So in this case, we could say 5. And what happens now is that every single submission is assigned to your entire team. So when they come in to judge and score, they see the entire list. However, once a particular applicant is scored, in this case 5 times, it falls off that list so nobody else can score them. So the downside of that is you're going to have some very eager beaver, committee members who want to score everybody, right? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because since they took the initiative to do it, they likely had the capacity to do it. But the benefit of this is that if you've got a committee member who drops out, you're not left trying to reassign them, because obviously the submission still needs scored, which means that when a committee member comes in, if it still shows up in their queue, it still needs to be evaluated. So those are just a couple examples. So a question came in around generating a condensed report of grant recipients. I need a few words summary. Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up. So the beauty of Reviewr is that we work in a lot of different industries. We do recognition awards, scholarships, grants, board nominations, committee apps, volunteer applications, fellowships, you name it. And AI is going to be used in different ways for different use cases. And what you're describing is actually something that happens a lot with our recognition awards, is that once a award nominee has been selected, they now want to market that person. And so they're going to be using AI to analyze their nomination packet to create a very short summary that's now used for marketing purposes. So 100% to that question. And you can kind of see it happening here. If I go back to my summaries, right, here is a high level summary of this individual application. And I think where this has become extremely valuable for you is we're not even discussing here today the ongoing data collection from a grantee. So in this particular example, if the Harvest Hope Community Alliance is selected for funding, and maybe we want them to come back to Reviewr in 6 months or 1 year from now and do an impact report, the data from that ongoing reporting can also be used in summaries. So you can have an initial summary to use to say, hey, here's an example, here's who we funded. And then you can create summaries about their ongoing impact that you guys can use to post to your communities or to your board members, you name it. So yes, to answer your question, this is a good example of summaries. And I think, again, you may have tried this. I think AI models play a big role with it. AI prompting plays a big role with it. And so that's obviously hopefully where we're here to assist, as well as that, we can kind of guide you guys down how to best prompt this to create these summaries. One thing I also want to throw out there for those of you guys who are using AI right now, I would be just aware of the tools that you're using, and depending on what data you're putting into it. So I actually just recently got off a call with one of our clients who's a scholarship provider, and they were trying to use AI to do a lot of these things that we talked about. And they were actually taking scholar applications and putting them into Chat GPT, and it did a good job. The challenge with that is we're taking student information and highly confidential data, and we're putting it into OpenAI. And that's kind of a big no-no, because we don't want that data to be shared, right? We also don't want it to be used to be analyzed and used to train data models. So on Reviewr's end, all of it is done locally. It's not being shared across our clients. It's not being shared to Google or OpenAI or X or any of these other kind of AI softwares and vendors out there. And none of your personal data that's powered using our AI will be used to train the AI models. So it's your data. It's just used to analyze for you specifically.